Lemuel Peterson Weber grew up a farm boy in New Jersey, but early on felt a call to ministry and was educated and ordained. He answered a request to preach the gospel in the nearly lawless silver mine camps in Nevada. 2 years later, during his time of grieving for his first wife and their baby, Reverend Weber became determined to create a community organized for religion and education. In contrast to what he had witnessed, this would become the Westminster Colony. In 1870, he accepted a position ministering to the new Anaheim Presbyterian Church while he pursued his dream.
Annals of Westminster Colony, 1870. The plan of Westminster Colony was first conceived by Reverend L.P. Weber. His desire was to found a community who could think and act together on the great subjects of morals and religion. He wanted good, moral, church-going, Sabbath-observing people, and only such, and desired that they consciously and heartily unite in the services of a Presbyterian church, which he intended should be established at as early a day as possible. In June 1870, Mr. Weber came to Anaheim to live, and immediately came down here. He then decided that this spot should be the site of Westminster Colony. He then entered into negotiations with the land company and obtained control of about 6,500 acres of land. According to agreement, the price of land was to be $13 per acre. The deeds were to be given by the land company, and no person was to be allowed to receive a deed or purchase land within the limits of the colony, save those who were recommended by Mr. Weber. Having arranged matters to the satisfaction of all parties concerned, he next issued his prospectus and scattered them abroad, in which, as stated before, he invited those of like ideas with himself in religion and morals to locate on the colony. Arrangements were also made for the establishment of a Presbyterian church and public school, as before mentioned. The first man who responded to the call and made his home here was Mr. John Anderson, who came from near Anaheim in November 1870. He settled on a piece of land on which was the only house there on the colony, into which he moved with his wife. They have the honor of being the pioneers of Westminster. In April 1871, on the 16th of this month, Mr. Weber preached his first sermon to the members of the colony. He had between 20 and 30 hearers. That's cute how they say hearers. In July 1871, the Sunday school was organized and Mr. Anderson was chosen superintendent.
The Westminster Presbyterian Church was organized in September 1872 with 17 charter members and Reverend Weber as pastor. The first classes of the brand new Westminster Public School started the same month.
1874, July 1st, Mr. Weber took leave of Westminster and his family went back to Anaheim for medical treatment. His cold, which he took a year and a half ago, had gradually become stronger and he proportionally weaker. His voice had entirely failed. The Reverend Mr. King then took charge of our church. On September 25th, 1874, at the gathering, notices were distributed through the audience announcing the death at Anaheim of our beloved superintendent, Mr. Weber. He had been spared long enough to see the complete success which had crowned his efforts in establishing this colony. It seemed to be the work for which he was brought to this coast, and at its completion he was called to the reward of a good and faithful servant. His funeral was largely attended at the Presbyterian Church at Anaheim, at which place his remains were interred.
After the death of Reverend Weber, the church and the colony carried on. The church was incorporated in 1876 in order to buy land, and the first Presbyterian church building was completed in 1878, dedicated June 1, 1879. After a fire in 1915, the second church building was dedicated on April 9, 1916, on the same site at Olive and Plaza Streets, across from Sigler Park. This church has had a long history of reaching out to its neighbors. In 1905, a Japanese immigrant mission was started at Wintersburg, in what is now Huntington Beach, as part of our church. In 1930, the Wintersburg Japanese Presbyterian Church was organized and became self-supporting. In the 1950s, the congregation had grown considerably and looked for a larger space for services. They bought the current campus and built the worship center. Eventually, the current sanctuary was built and dedicated on April 2, 1967, during the church's 95th year. The names of the founding members of this church, as well as names of later elders, have left their marks on our community. You will find them in street names and also marking local schools because of their dedication to education. Here are just a few examples. The Lemuel Peterson Weber School, the Harry B. Anderson School, named for John's son, who grew up in the original public school and the church. He became an elder in the church and served faithfully for 50 years as treasurer. He was also a school board member. John F. Land was an elder of the church and superintendent of the Westminster School District. The dedication declaration for the second church building in 1916 was, "We dedicate this church, and with it ourselves, to the worship and service of God, and to the work of winning souls through the preaching of the word and holding up the cross of Christ." We echo that today with our mission and vision statement, God's family shining Christ's light in our community by trusting God, sharing the gospel, and building relationships in love and unity. We are a church by God's grace that values loving God and loving others, focusing on God's word, depending on His Spirit through prayer, and providing a place to belong.